Take two. All right. Refocusing health during lockdown. As I said in the first take, there's so many things been going on throughout this time, but just kind of give you a bit of a snapshot of what's happening back in the States. Very restrictions. Gyms are closed once again, but we still have access to health professionals, be it that is face-to-face or one-on-ones in a park or athletics track, or whether it's an online realm. Limited ability to see and meet friends and family. Now, this is probably the one that's going to take a mental hit on a lot of people quite heavily, especially for those in an older generation, where they're used to this family connectedness, being connected to their kids, their grandkids, and used to seeing them on a frequent or regular basis. Now we've got a limited travel ability. We can only travel within 10 kilometers. So if we wanted to go do a day trip down to, Mount Dandenong or something like that, we potentially can't do that anymore because of the actual restriction of how far we can actually go. We're also in the middle of winter. We know that people tend to eat a lot more in winter. People tend to stay indoors during winter. We know vitamin D levels within us are actually a lot lower during this time. We're less hydrated as well. During winter, especially when I was in Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin was like, when I was working, I wouldn't see sunlight in the morning. I wouldn't even see sunlight in the evening. I had to force myself to go outside to actually get some sort of sunlight at lunchtime. And I was like a godsend. And I actually went through seasonal depression for 2 weeks. And it really felt like crap. It was like Groundhog Day the whole time. So we need to really make sure that our health is really in check, because we're in probably the worst part of winter, and it's cold, it's wet, no one wants to go out, no one wants to do anything, and there's really nothing for people to really do at the end of the day. And we were just stuck in a 13-week lockdown, and that took a toll on quite a few people. People saw a bit of relief when we went to stage 2 restrictions, which was good. Now that we have to roll back into stage 3, potentially that's going to carry on for longer than the 6-week period, and it kind of feels like it's going to roll on a little bit longer. So people are going to have to hold on just a little bit longer than 6 weeks, in my eyes. Anyways, the suicide rate is on the rise. So it's 8 people die each day from suicide, and the age group is between, I think it's 15 and 44. So a lot of young Australians are actually deciding to take their own lives during this time, and that's about 1,000 people have committed suicide, and I think we've got about 100 and something cases of people that have passed away. So it's this weird balancing act that the government has to sort out really quickly, because unfortunately it's going to tip the scales one way or the other if they don't sort out something relatively soon. And this is probably the most important stat that I think is what's led to the previous stat is 1 in 4 don't have anyone to talk to. So social isolation is really becoming a thing now. We feel like we're physically distancing ourselves, but inadvertently we kind of create this thought process in our head, or subconsciously, that we actually have to socially distance with people as well. So it actually requires a lot more energy, effort, and time to actually be able to contact someone and check in with someone and just have a general conversation and check in how they're going. Usually if people do have a conversation or have some level of social connection with their family or their friends or whoever, or their partner, we know their stress levels are going to reduce, the happiness is going to be increased. And because we are social animals as well, our serotonin is going to increase as well. So Dave, I know you're a social cat, so it's very important to you to actually keep those social connections going. I know, Nathan, you're not the most social cat, especially in high school, but it's still important to have some level of social connection outside of like your nucleus of where you are. It's actually healthy to venture out. Otherwise, you just see one perspective all the time, and it's nice to move yourself and look from the world from a different perspective when you're able to talk to someone else. Why do we need to refocus on our health? I think without our health, we have nothing. Essentially, if our health disintegrates, basically we're knocking on death's door. And it's not a pretty thing, unfortunately. And now that we're a lot of people are quite fearful for their health. You know, the face masks and all the social isolation, all that is really ramping up. People are becoming a lot more fearful that they potentially might get it, or something severe might happen to them or a loved one as well. We need to focus on overall wellness and quality of life. And these are actually like more of the 5 pillars that help to uphold our health, our ability to function at the end of the day. If we look after your body, we look after we will look after ourselves. So if we're constantly nourishing our body, eating the right foods, going to sleep, getting enough water in our system, getting physical exercise as well, it has a very strong connection to our mental health as well, and our social health and our emotional health. So we need to make sure that we're looking at all aspects. So at the bottom here, we're looking after all these pillars to keep our health solid and strong and have a solid foundation. So if anything does attack our system, you know, we've got the foundation pillars there in order to support us. And I thought this was a really good representation. When you do start to strip away some of these pillars of health, it does lead to deterioration, and eventually that's knocking on your door kind of deal. People are gaining more weight. This is greater stress on the body and potential issues down the track. So we're going to have a secondary health epidemic, or epidemic, I believe would be the right term. We're going to have increased type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke. I think that's going to start going up. Certain types of cancers that are related to poor lifestyle choices are all are going to kind of go on the increase in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's great that we're looking at the pandemic now and really trying to attack it, but we need to make sure that we're still addressing these things in the longer term, because you know, a big chunk of the population, 99.99999% of the population, is still going to be here at the end of the day. This has been a review from our previous webinars that health is not a fixed state. It's something that we have to kind of work on all the time. It just constantly fluctuates based on the inputs of the environment, or what we feed our body, what we expose our body to, whether work is stressful, whether you get food poisoning or something like that. Our health just constantly changes all the time. If you have a bad night's sleep, if you have an argument with someone, it affects your internal state, which therefore affects your external output on the environment. You can, and like I mentioned before, if you're not looking after your overall health, those 5 pillars, you can transition from optimal health to ill health over a period of time. The problem is, though, it's gradual. People do get faked out to believe it's like, oh, my health is okay. And usually those people haven't really experienced optimal health. They think that kind of like their health is good, but it should be a lot better. So when something stressful does happen, or something that's detrimental to their health, they're able to really deal with it and attack it and appropriately address it in a timely fashion. It's something that you don't attain, but it needs to be consistently worked on. So those pillars, they're kind of like this ever-evolving life forms that you have to constantly feed and look after and nurture, like a plant at the end of the day. Give it too much sunlight, it potentially dies. If you get too little sunlight, it potentially dies. Too much water, potentially dies. Too little, it potentially dies. So we need to make sure that we're nourishing all these 5 pillars, which I'll explain in a second, in order to really support our health in the long term. And there are degrees of health and there are severity of illness, which I'm going to briefly talk about now. So the illness, wellness continuum. So I kind of put down these are more what you'd see on a daily basis, in terms of way people interact with environments, from disease, poor health, neutral, good health, and optimal health. It's quite interesting to actually see the transition between each of the stages, but probably the most common one is between a 4 and a 6 out of 10. Now, I call this kind of the neutral state. You're asymptomatic potentially, but you don't display any signs or symptoms of ill health. They're sick infrequently. They're kind of faked down to believing that they are healthy, but they're somewhat independent. independent, but they also depend on others at certain times as well. And they tend to prioritize others' health first. So these are people that are potentially doormats in their own life. Like there's plenty of examples. I'm not going to name anyone, but these are the individuals that, yeah, I'm not going to shame anyone. These are individuals that look after themselves last. So what I mean by this at the end of the day is that if something pops up, it's like they're the first ones there. They're the first ones. They find meaning in helping others. And this is that faked out part is when you help others so much, you get bored up in their own issues, then they become dependent on you. Then you actually lose independence over time. You lose that ability to be your own person. Your ability to prioritize yourself is so much harder because you've done that for so long, for so many months or years, or how long it's been. The ideal state that we want to get people into is obviously optimal health. This is 100% function, continuous development, active participation, wellness, and lifestyle. These are people, I wouldn't say I'm particularly up there yet. I'd probably say I'm more of an 8 than anything else. My health's pretty good. These are individuals that really practice looking after themselves on a regular basis. They do yoga, meditation, they read a lot of personal development. They look after themselves first, prioritize themselves first. So it might be, instead of waking up 2 minutes before they have to go to work, might wake up 90 minutes before they go to work and go through their morning rituals and routines. Probably the best example of optimal health that I could probably think of is Nick Flockus. He's a person who wakes up like before the crack of dawn, takes his time, very methodical in the way he warms up with his training. The way he eats is very methodical. He asks good questions. He's all about self-development. He prioritizes himself first, but he'll still help others as well. He's not a doormat, but he'll make sure that he's putting himself first, get his stuff done, his own personal stuff done, make sure that he's in a really good state to serve others. And this is what individuals like Nick make them as really good leaders, is because they lead by example, because you've got to live your own life first before you can start assisting others. All right, so now we're going to go through the 5 pillars specifically. So in terms of getting yourself to that optimal health state. So sleep, we know sleep is super important. If you haven't listened to or watched Why We Sleep, definitely a powerful book in terms of really having an appreciation of sleep. This one kind of really caught my attention is where they talk about sleep is like, sleeping habits. It's all different to everyone, right? I might be someone I'm more of an early riser, but if I was with Brit, she's more likely to sleep in. But that's how her body functions. Her body will take time in the morning to really get going. Some people are going to be better off sleeping later on, sleep in later, but go to bed later. But you still want to keep to the 6 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Sleep, like I said before, sleep routine is really important. Avoiding technology as well before going to sleep. If you look at the blue light before you sleep, whether you're reading an article or something like that, I can't specifically say what it does, but it does keep you awake. So it increases the neurotransmitter activity within the brain. So it actually makes it a lot harder to actually sleep. And I believe Dave just nodded, I think serotonin levels decrease as well. The ability to actually sleep is on the decrease. Another thing that's worthwhile to do is read meditation or even writing down notes. The reason why is it gets your thoughts from your head out onto paper, or with reading, it actually allows you to kind of take yourself away. So removing yourself from here, so pretend that you're in here metaphorically, it just allows yourself to kind of remove yourself from whatever's going on in your world and put yourself in and potentially look at things from a different perspective, or take you away from that. Meditation is a nice thing to do to actually help de-stress, unwind, bring you from a sympathetic state, so a jacked up state for whatever reason, and actually bring you more of a parasympathetic state, as well. Really just calm down the body, decrease blood pressure, decrease your heart rate, and decrease the vagal nerve activity. And probably the best thing to do as well is actually monitor your sleep. So for those who don't monitor sleep, it's definitely something that's worthwhile, especially for those in academic world. Um, the reason why we want to monitor sleep is because we know how well we're actually potentially we're recovering, and whether or not we actually need more sleep based on if we're doing more work or more load throughout the day. And that will come back to my physical activity or movement or exercise pillar. Nutrition, we know nutrition is super important. We know variety of food is actually important. So actually make sure that we get enough micronutrients. So we don't want to be constantly consuming the same foods. It's actually pretty good to get variation in. And foods that are seasonal as well. There's a reason why foods are seasonal. Specifically, I've gone blank now actually. Certain foods actually be more beneficial certain times of the year. So we want to make sure that we've got adequate amount of vitamin D. Iron's another one, so energy levels do deplete during the winter as well. And we want to make sure that potentially eating foods that are high in tryptophan as well. And tryptophan actually helps us to sleep. So chicken and turkey, they're high in amino acid, which is more a macronutrient. Back to that point is we want to make sure we've got protein in each meal as well. So we make sure we're adequately recovering. We're also preventing muscle wasting as well. And we make sure that we've got building blocks throughout a whole system at the end of the day. So they're not just used for muscle building, also to help build other tissue, collagen, hair. It's also going to contain micronutrients as well, which are going to be critical just for our daily function at the end of the day. I actually suggest to a lot of people is walk after eating. It actually improves your blood glucose clearing at the end of the day. So those who are pre-diabetic, it's actually worthwhile to actually go for a walk 15 minutes afterwards, because it actually promotes the uptake of nutrients whilst you're walking and after walking as well through exercise-induced pathways. We also want to limit high human interference foods in our diet. So what I mean is anything that comes in a box or is packaged. It actually reduces the micronutrient content. So we want to try and eat foods more in their solid state as much as possible. So like a steak, we want it to be a steak. We don't want it to it's heavily refined or processed and added preservatives, because it does decrease the actual micronutrient content within it. And as a result, some foods have to be fortified as well. So bread's actually a stereotypical one, and cereals, where they might have they might be high in something, but if that's a high in wheat, wheat can have some micronutrients, but through the actual refinement process to get to the end product, they say, it might be low in this. So what they do is they actually fortify it with potentially Kellogg's or Special K. They tend to put vitamin D to fortify it. Same thing with bread as well. And water. Most of us aren't probably drinking enough water, but we can still get water from, there we go, Nathan. Most of us can actually get water from our diet. So if we're eating foods that have very little or to no human interference, we're actually going to get a high water content in the actual food itself. So think of fruits, vegetables, meats as well. They can have quite a high water content. Obviously, with certain proteins you want to cook all the way through. Exercise and movement promotes circulation and allows tissue to function properly. Usually, Charles Darwin, you adapt to your environment. I can't remember the specific quote, but it's important that we actually, if we are sitting for long periods of time, we actually need to do something to help counteract that position that we're getting ourselves into. Another way to actually think about it is with the elderly, you give them a walking frame, and they actually turn out to be a candy cane in 2 years' time, where literally their spine is so rounded and orthotic, it's almost like they have to sit down to actually look up at the sky. or sit down, lean back and look at the sky. They can't actually look up. It's so far around it because they've adapted to that environment of having the hands forward, shifts all their body weight forward, and as a result, they become stuck in this position. Obviously, if you're younger, this is not going to happen anytime soon, but it's something that we need to be aware of now is if we are stuck in a position for periods of time, say we're sitting, working the desk, something like that, we need to make sure that we're actually training ourselves to get out of these positions as well, so then we can move throughout. It also helps to reduce the risk of lifestyle-related diseases. Like I said, we'll see this increase in at least in the next 2 years. Beyond with COVID, we're going to have more health-related, lifestyle-related issues probably in history. We try to decrease it; it's still going up throughout this time, and I think we're just going to see another inflection as a result. You gain more energy in the long run as well. A lot of people don't realize when they start exercising, they actually feel like they got more energy from training. Now, the catch is when you start training, you feel like you have decrease in energy, but then your body actually becomes a lot more efficient at using fuels, and your strength reserve increases. So therefore, you'll technically not have to work as hard. So therefore, the amount of time that you can actually work for actually begins to increase as well. So your work capacity begins to increase. So therefore, you're going to have more energy to perform whatever you need to. Exercise also helps promote sleep. There's a thing called sleep pressure. If we don't build up enough sleep pressure throughout the day from physical activity, being active, whatever it may be, training, sport, it's going to be a lot harder to actually fall asleep. So our body really wants to be active throughout the day in order to help us promote sleep, which if we're not sleeping very well, or we find that we're struggling to get to sleep, it's going to eventually have a domino effect to the next day. So it can begin to affect our overall health. And it also promotes good nutrition. So the one thing I have noticed when people do start to exercise and train for the first time, their eating habits begin to improve. So just getting people to move and do some form of structured exercise, they actually begin to make some better food choices in the long run. And this is just an observation that I've had throughout the past. I'm not too sure if you've seen that, Dave. Have you noticed that before?
What was that, sorry?
Have you noticed that when people start training for the first time, say if it's for a couple of months, they kind of talk to you about their food habits, like they start to eat a little bit better?
Yeah, I think it's like a domino effect because they're like, they start realizing, like food, they sort of experiment without telling you first, because it's like a preconceived notion that, I'll have some veggies or I'll have some lean meats, and then suddenly it becomes like, okay, this is important, so I'll keep doing it. And then they ask you because they're like, how do I go about it?
Yeah, they they flirt with the idea of good nutrition whilst they're training, because then they start to feel a lot better, their sleep is a lot better, potentially their mood's improved as well. They kind of just go off what they know, then obviously then we can start to make changes later on. Last one is mental and emotional health. We are social creatures, even with total introverts and want to live under a rock. We still need some level of interaction for our own mental health. If you actually, all the cells in our body all have to communicate with one another. But if you look on a larger scale, we as an organism, a multicellular organism, need to communicate with other multicellular organisms in order to function well and procreate and continue to keep the species alive and all that jazz. Our relationship with ourselves will also dictate our relationship with others. Now, this is probably more of an observation than anything else. Usually when people who are really mad at the world are kind of avoiding and they're actually more mad at themselves within the world than anything else. So if someone lashes out and puts you down, or I don't know, whatever it is, usually they're more upset. They're subconsciously actually upset with themselves. So Mum and I, we've done personal development, and usually the world is a reflection of you. if your internal world is, bridges burning and just this total negativity, the way you perceive the world is going to be like that. So you're seeing the world through your rose-colored glasses. A sense of purpose, and this can be lost, especially during this time as well, especially that we're supposed to come together as a cohort, and we kind of lose our own purpose or our own identity when we do come together. So it's really important to be working to a greater cause, but also continue to be individual in other aspects or in other areas of our own world, so we can continue to develop and continue to move forward, and continue to see things not just through the same lens. Joy and satisfaction, I think it's probably a really critical part, that if we're not enjoying life or have any level of satisfaction in life, it becomes really difficult for a lot of people to continue on through life as well. So especially now that a lot of joy and that satisfaction and a sense of purpose and that people's beliefs and values have been really tested and pushed to the edge or potentially stripped away, it's going to be a lot harder for people to have just wanting to be around. And this is where people's mental and emotional health can dip down very quickly. And beliefs and values, and I think these are important to have, is have some sort of concrete beliefs or values, whether or not you have them memorized or on your screen, on your laptop screen as a reminder, or on the bathroom. And having, words to live by is actually really critical to have, because then you live and all your choices are actually made through those beliefs or values or those goals that you want to achieve. So everything, you start to live more in alignment with your purpose. And people's purposes in life are really being tested, and potentially some of them will have to change or have to be renegotiated or something with themselves in order to make sure that they feel like they've got that sense of purpose, joy, and satisfaction within their lives. All these factors will determine how we interact with the world and how we perceive ourselves within it. The more negative the world is, the harder we need to work on ourselves to be able to interact effectively within the world. So people perceive the world as really negative at the moment. It's actually, if you look through history, it's actually not that bad. I think there's been times in the last century when it's been a lot worse. And people are really seeing the world as kind of burning from underneath them. So these individuals really need to work harder to actually kind of pull themselves out of this potential, what would you call it, mental pit or negative pit. So we're going to make sure that we develop these resiliency factors within us, whether it is doing some personal development, doing some reading, or we're constantly feeding our body with positive stuff or nourishing our body. That will allow us to really take on all the negative stuff within our world. That's why Navy SEAL training is so rough and robust, to really filter out the best to get the best of the cream of the crop, or like the SAS guys, because then they can really take on whatever's going to come at them. And this is the same lesson that we can do for ourselves, make sure that we're feeding ourselves positivity, living in some sort of purpose or alignment, and really just moving forward and taking actions that are in line with our purpose and alignment. And the more positive and easy the world is, the more challenges we need for self-worth. Now, the flip coin of this is, if you're fed, a multi-million-dollar business and you didn't have to lift a finger and you just kind of just pissed through school and just got your P's, and which helped you get your degrees and all that jazz, the world actually becomes a lot harder to live once you enter the real world. It's like you've grown up in this bubble, everything was spoon-fed to you. Could have been whatever reason but these individuals actually face bigger challenges of self-worth because it hasn't been developed at a young age. They don't know what it's like to fail as a child. They don't know what it's like to problem solve as a kid as well. So therefore they've avoided these two critical things in order to create some self-worth later on down the track. And these need to be developed in our childhood and teenage years. So that's why when it comes to kids, we provide the parameters for them to work in, we give them the problem, and we give them the potential tools to solve it. Not let's spoon feed every child, or let the child dictate how things are going to go. They need rules, boundaries, but they need to be given a sense of purpose and direction at the end of the day. This is the last one. Stress. If we don't appropriately adapt, we'll maladapt. So, for example, training. Training is something as simple as if we train too much, we're not going to recover well, and then we're going to see a dip in our performance, a dip to recover, dip in our mental health. Potentially might lose some muscle mass. We potentially might get sick or ill. The immunity system is suppressed. So we need to make sure that we're appropriately adapting to stress within our lives. So if we have arguments of our friends and family, friends and family are a form of stress, work's a form of stress, sport is a form of stress. All these things need to be dealt with so we can adapt to it, problem solve through it. Then we can start to go through a little bit more stress each time. It's like for you guys, like, building this business, I had to start at scale. Then as I wanted to get bigger, the stresses got a little bit larger. And I dealt with those stresses, then the business got a little bit bigger again. I dealt with those stresses again, and the business got a little bit bigger again, and so on and so forth. You get bigger and bigger, but your ability to deal with stress begins to increase, or your adaptability within being exposed to stress begins to build and build and build. So then when you go to tackle larger problems or a problem in a certain area, you do have that capacity to be able to deal with that stress and tackle it, and not be a deer in the headlights and be like, fuck this, I'm gone. We have systems inbuilt within us to be able to adapt as well. So we need to make sure that we're acknowledging how much stress is coming in through our systems. So whether it is through work, whether it's through training, whether it's through the environment, the weather, we need to make sure that we have this, that we're actually nourishing those systems at the same time as well. So we're eating well, we're exercising, we're feeding the brain some good things, podcasts, meditation, ebooks, whatever it may be, in order to help support the systems within us at the end of the day. And just a quick summary, our health changes daily to what we do and what we don't expose us to. Exercise, nutrition, sleep, stress, and mental and emotional health are critical, and what gives us a current state of health. So we need to make sure that we're looking after these 5 pillars here, because this is essentially the outcome that we're striving towards in order to prop up our health and make sure that we can deal with everything that comes in. So pretend we've got, a shower of, whatever, it's like work stress or something like that. Say you're under the crunch. Say, Nathan, you're under the crunch. You got a 2-week turnaround, and you feel like you need another 8 weeks. So the stress is going to increase. So then if you're looking after all these 5 pillars, you're going to feel like you're going to have the resiliency to be able to cope with that at the same time as well. Because when you do come out of it, you don't want to feel all broken and defeated down here. We've had some of these pillars actually stripped out from underneath you. And the nice thing is we can improve it, because we're ever evolving, ever adapting to our situation in order to stay alive. The nice thing is we can actually work on it. And that's pretty much it of me rambling for the. So you can unmute yourself.